Hey everybody, welcome to Tea and Chocolate. And today I am excited to have the author of a book I just finished reading. And this book is about family, it's about forgiveness and love, and it's an unexpected story, a memoir by Judi Miller, and the book is called Perfect. And the title itself is, I was intrigued by the title, Judi, because I thought, okay, where is she going with this? And I've got so many creases and highlights in the book because there's just little jewels and reminders of things and the way you put things. And I thought the writing was really beautiful. So thank you for writing this book.
Thank you.
And for letting us into your lives. So I would love it if you would just start off by introducing yourself and how the book came about.
Sure, I'd love to. So Lauren, for most of my life, I felt different. I felt like I didn't belong. I felt incomplete, always searching for something to make me feel whole. And I also felt unworthy, always having to prove myself. So I was actually born in Trinidad and I moved to the United States when I was very, very young. And I didn't look like other people in my neighborhood. And this is not about race or discrimination. I just didn't look like other people. I was also born with 11 fingers, and I had this ability to sense and feel different energies, especially at night. So no matter what I did, I never felt like I fit in. So I started my career as a CPA for one of the big four accounting firms. And then I actually went into healthcare for over 25 years where I was a finance director.
Okay.
And I graduated from the Harvard Business School Executive Leadership Program. But no matter what I did, it was never enough. I always felt like I was nothing. But Lauren, you know what I learned?
What?
I learned that in the nothingness, we could be anything that we want. And what I mean by that is when we let go of the stories, the labels, and the judgments, we could emerge as our true and authentic self. So when I look out into the world, I see so many people who had those same feelings that I did, but now I see that there's a way to let go of them so we could all truly emerge as our true and authentic selves.
Wow, that's beautiful. Thank you for that. Now, why do you think that those feelings that you had happened like at night? Why does that happen? Do you know? From all that you've gone through,
Mm-hmm.
do you have any inkling as to why that happens?
I absolutely do. And if it's okay with you, I'd love to give you and your listeners kind of like a 5-minute overview of the story, and you can see where that fear came from.
Absolutely.
So, like many children, I had fears as a child. I was actually afraid of drowning, but I was also terrified of the night. I was terrified of the darkness. And also, one of the other fears that I had that I never mentioned to anyone until several years ago when I started to write this book, I had a fear of being sexually assaulted. I had never been assaulted. So, as you could imagine, as a child, these feelings were extremely confusing.
Mm-hmm.
So, I was terrified of going to bed every night. And every night I would literally crawl into bed, pull the covers over my head, and I would recite the Lord's Prayer over and over again until exhausted, I would eventually fall asleep. So this was my bedtime ritual night after night. And it continued well into my 20s. I just mentioned that I started my career as a CPA. So here I am with this very traditional job, traditional lifestyle. And then at night, I would crawl back into bed terrified of what I couldn't explain. So I actually met my husband at work. He's a CPA also.
Uh-huh.
And we got married and we had kids. We had 2 incredible kids. And in the exhaustion of raising 2 children, commuting 3 hours a day to work and working 40 to 50 hours a week, in that exhaustion, everything stopped. The energies, the subtle whispers, it all stopped.
Oh, interesting.
And if there's any empty nesters out there, you know what it's like when your kids go away and the house all of a sudden becomes silent.
Ah.
But in that silence, everything returned. People asked me what it felt like. It felt like someone was always standing behind me, or if their eyes staring at me from across the room. And I must have looked comical to the neighbors because I would literally tiptoe around my house, afraid of who or what I might encounter. At night, I would wake up in the middle of the night clutching in fear at my husband, and soon we both began to lose sleep. And around the same time, I actually started to bleed uncontrollably month after month, and I went to see my doctor. And she said that I needed to get a hysterectomy. And Lauren, I was terrified of the prospect of having this surgery, and I couldn't understand why. As I mentioned, was a finance director for over 20 years in the healthcare industry, so I trust modern medicine. But Lauren, it felt like the same fear that I had as a child. It felt like the same fear that returned to me as an adult. So a very good friend of mine recommended that I read a book called Light Emerging by Barbara Brennan.
Mm-hmm.
And you're shaking your head, so you might be familiar with it.
Yeah, I've never read it, but I know I know of her. Yes.
So she was actually a former NASA physicist, and she actually studied the human energy field. And what
Right.
she learned, she was actually able to heal people. So as you can imagine, here I am, days before my surgery, terrified, and I'm on the internet Googling healers near me. And as I
Oh,
sat
cool.
across from my healer for that very first time,
Yes.
I'm extremely auditory. I heard the click of a lock, like my entire life was locking into place. And I didn't know the role that that healer actually played in my family's history. So I continued to work with my healer after my hysterectomy. We continued to work together for several months. And after I healed from the hysterectomy, we started to explore this uncontrollable fear that I had of the night. But I never mentioned to her the fear of sexual assault. So we started to explore my childhood to see if there was any experiences that actually triggered it, but nothing came to light. And then she actually introduced me to a lot of new topics that I'd actually never heard of. She introduced me to a concept called past lives. And she introduced me to the amazing work of Dr. Brian Weiss, Dr. Michael Newton, Dolores Cannon. And then we also started to talk about my parents. We know that we could inherit so many things from our parents: the color of our eyes, the color of our hair, the shape of our nose. But the science of epigenetics tells us that we could actually inherit the pain and the trauma that our parents experienced. So they've shown with Holocaust survivors that these survivors, they actually pass down these memories and the terror to their children and their children's children.
Mm.
But scientists have actually shown in recent studies with mice, they would introduce the smell of cherry blossoms to mice and then gently zap them on the feet. So Lauren, as you can imagine, after a while, just the smell of cherry blossoms would elicit the same fear in these mice. But what I found more amazing was that the mice's children and their offspring, just the scent of cherry blossoms would trigger the same fear.
Isn't that amazing?
It's amazing. But you know what's interesting?
Yeah.
Those mice, the offspring and their offspring, were never zapped. They were actually never exposed to the father that was zapped.
Uh-huh.
So what we uncovered on this journey was that pain and that terror that I felt every night was actually a cellular memory from my mother. I found out on her 80th birthday that she was attacked as a young child.
Mhm.
And what I also learned was that female babies are born with 2 to 3 million of their reproductive eggs at birth. So for much of your mother's young life and her young adulthood, you were actually in there as an unborn egg. So you experienced the same traumas and the triumphs that she did.
Okay, so I'm just going to just pause for a second because the way you just put that, I just kind of went, right, right. Because I was thinking when you were telling the story about, your mother and that, I was thinking, well, yes, of course, she's in her womb. But I never thought before you got there, right, with what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
So sorry, go ahead.
Since you mentioned it, I recently saw a picture and I thought, pictures are worth 1,000 words.
Right,
So it was a picture of a grandmother, and inside of the grandmother was the mother, the baby, right?
right.
And inside the mother's uterus was the 2 to 3 million reproductive eggs. So it's not just your mother. When your grandmother was pregnant with your mother, you were there also experiencing all of that.
Right. It's like yes. Oh my God, that's so genius. Yes.
So that pain and that terror, to your question, your original question, that pain and that terror that I felt every night was the cellular memory of when my mother was attacked. But Lauren, I know that you read the book, so it doesn't end there. There's actually a shocking connection to the very healer that I trusted in this lifetime to heal me.
Yes.
And in that moment of revelation, I won't give it all away, but
No.
in
Right.
that moment of revelation, I could have felt fear, I could have felt anger, I could have felt betrayal, but I didn't. All I felt was the love and the perfection of the universe, how incredibly loved we are. I saw how all of our souls are actually interconnected across lifetimes and how we could heal in any moment in this lifetime or in any other. So the reason I wrote perfect is because I saw the perfection in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And as I mentioned, in that moment, I could have felt fear, anger, or betrayal. I could have created a story
Wow.
that would literally haunt me for the rest of my life. But I didn't. I chose instead to see the love and the perfection in that very moment. And I saw how we can all let go of the stories that no longer serve us. So that's why I wrote the book.
Yeah, it's quite incredible. I mean, it really presented an opportunity so that we don't give way to the book. How the opportunity to have forgiveness, and I thought, God, why so many of us are not listening to those opportunities or taking those opportunities, or even would consider, our ancestry and who came before us and what we're carrying forward today.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And
Go ahead.
you were saying before the subtitle to the book is A Path to Love, Forgiveness, and
Yes.
Transformation. So forgiveness, there are so many different definitions of forgiveness, but for me, it's really simple. It means to forego or to let go of. So painful and unwanted events are going to happen to all of us. We
Mm-hmm.
could either experience it once, or we could literally play it over and over again, hundreds, maybe even thousands of times until it becomes stuck, until it becomes our identity, it becomes our story. So for me, forgiveness really is just letting go of those contracted negative stories so we could literally move forward and experience true and ultimate freedom. So I believe forgiveness is one of the greatest gifts that we can give ourselves as an act of self-love.
Yeah, and I get that from you. I get that from the book, and I think that many of us do get stuck in the story. And I felt that you had this innate ability to do that. And I wondered, because you had also mentioned in the book that you are a practicing Catholic. I don't know if you are that today. And I mean, I'm wondering if that sort of relationship with the Creator has helped you with that piece of forgiveness so that it comes more with ease. A lot of us are just stuck in that story. so, um, so I'm wondering if there is some sort of, if your relationship with the Creator was in this innate understanding that you have that
Mhm.
helps you with that.
So yes, I did grow up Catholic. I'm still Catholic, a practicing Catholic, but I really believe that the essence of who we are is love, and you've probably heard that from many other guests. But I believe the reason I was able to have these experiences and these awakenings and these understanding was because throughout this process, I was learning to open my heart.
Yes.
And as I would love to do this with you, play with me. So I invite you to close your eyes.
Oh my God. Okay.
And I invite your listeners to close their eyes as well. And my eyes are closed too. But as I laid on my healer's table for 45 minutes, week after week, I had nothing to do as she worked on me. So as I laid on her table, quite by accident, I discovered this. So as I laid on the table, I would bring in an image or memory of someone or something that I love. So I invite you to bring in a memory or an image of someone or something that you love. It could be a partner, it could be a friend, it could be a pet that makes you smile. And I want you to bring in that loving memory. And if you're visual in your mind's eye, picture it, see it. But not just that. I want you to truly feel it throughout your body. What does it feel like? What are you feeling? What are you sensing, tasting, touching, maybe even hearing in that very moment? And I want you to just experience that love. And I want you to send it to every cell in your body and truly experience that moment. And then I want you to multiply it 2 times more. And as this feeling of love moves throughout your body, I want you to bring in another image or memory. Maybe it's the first time you ever saw a beautiful sunset, or maybe the first time you saw a snowfall, or the first time you ever held a child in your hand, or maybe your very first kiss. And if you can't imagine anything, that's okay. Just imagine something. Just imagine it. And feel that love, see that love, hear that love. Let it open up your heart. Let it move throughout your entire body in every cell. And again, multiply it 2 times more. And I invite you to multiply it 10 times more till it's so magnificent that it just overpours and overflows from you. And I want you to gently put your hand on your heart and say, this love is for me. This love is me. And Lauren, when you're ready, you could gently open your eyes. But that exercise took us a minute. And what I love about it is that we could generate love in any moment, at any time. It's not dependent on anyone or anything. It's who we are. And as I laid there on the table week after week, doing this for 45 minutes, and you don't even have to do it that long because you saw how powerful it is just in a minute.
Yeah.
I was opening my heart. And by opening my heart, I allowed in miracles. I allowed in miracles to happen in my life. And I truly believe that's why I was able to go through this journey.
How are you? Thank you for that.
You're quite welcome.
I'm just so I'm glad that you gave a beautiful overview of the book without giving it away into its entirety. So people will hopefully feel inclined to read it. And I highly recommend that you do because it's really, really fascinating. I was curious about when you began to, you had these, I guess, these spiritual knowing and understandings and gifts you had as a child. And I wondered, we have such a divide in our culture versus spirituality and religion. And I'm wondering how you bring those two together.
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. So, as a child, I didn't appreciate them as gifts. I was afraid of the ability to feel and sense different energies and different spirits. It terrified me.
Right.
But there's so many parallels to today because so many of us push away our gifts or deny our gifts or doubt our gifts. It's when I truly learned to embrace my gifts that I saw how they can transform my life. So I think it's an important message that people truly embrace and appreciate the gifts that they have, because so many of us doubt ourselves.
Without question. I mean, today, the question is for me right now, as we were sitting in the experience while I was reading your book, right? Because your book is full of hope and faith and inspiration, and the ability to dream and to have that imagination again. And somehow today, I wondered, how do you still keep that alive when we see this sort of narrative and rhetoric and the inconsistencies around the planet? And we're trying to figure out, well, what's next for all of us? And I think go ahead, please.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great question. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that's good. It's long enough.
So I mentioned to you that a big part of my journey was learning to let go of stories, labels, and judgments.
Yes.
So I believe that when we let go of our stories, our labels, and our judgments, we see everything through the eyes of the Creator, the God of our understanding. Or even if you don't even believe in a creator, we see everything through the eyes of love. And through those lenses, we experience everything as if for the first time, because there is no story, label, or judgment that we're carrying with us. So we experience every moment as if for the first time, where it's beautiful, joyous, and wondrous. Like when you see a young child, they're so excited about life. They don't want to go to sleep because they don't want to miss anything, because everything is new. So Lauren, I invite you and your listeners, when you drop your stories, labels, and judgment, and truly be present and experience every moment for what it is truly joyous and miraculous.
Thank you. How do you think that this book invites us to look at life differently?
So I do appreciate that my story sounds a little unusual, maybe even uncommon, but it invites people to say, what if? What if it was true?
Sure.
Right?
Yes.
What if we could truly heal in any moment, in any lifetime?
Yes.
And some Native American cultures believe that when we heal 7 generations back, and we heal 7 generations forward.
Oh, forward also.
Yes.
Okay.
And when I went through this healing journey, not only was I able to heal myself, I was able to heal my mother. And I also saw it in my daughter, these fears and phobias that she had. I never mentioned this journey to her. I saw them slipping away. I saw her being transformed before my very eyes. So when we take the time to truly heal ourselves, we're healing our ancestors as well as those that go after us.
Mm. Does she know, does your daughter know the story now? Like
She does
today?
now. She does
Okay.
now.
Yeah. I was curious about your husband. where where he fit into all this, like when you were going through all that processing.
Uh-huh. And I think
If
that's a
it's too personal of a question, of course.
I'm gonna give you two answers
Okay.
because first you said, how do I marry spirituality as well as this journey
Yes.
and this experience that I
Yep.
had? As you know from reading the book, my husband is of a different faith, right?
Yes. Yes.
But I truly believe that all roads lead home.
This is it.
Regardless of your faith,
Yeah.
regardless of whether or not you believe in a creator, all roads lead home. So that was in response to your earlier question.
Yes.
And then in response to this question, you know, because I felt different all of my life,
Mm-hmm.
of course I made myself different, right?
Yes, I thought that was very poignant in that book, and when you said that.
So of course I
Yes.
attracted a man that was totally different from me. As I mentioned, he's different racially, religiously, spiritually, totally different, right? So when we got married, I actually closed my heart because I was afraid that his family would judge me for being different. And I talk about some of those experiences in the book.
Yes.
So when my
Yes.
mother-in-law passed away, she came to visit, and I'm not a medium, but again, I believe that when you open your heart, unimaginable things happen. So I was grieving her, my heart was wide open, and she came to visit. And many of the experiences that I have in the book sound like near-death experiences.
Mm-hmm.
So she came to visit me, and in that moment, she literally showed me every scene and every interaction that I had with my husband and his family. It literally went by like this.
Wow.
And what I saw, Lauren, is
Yes.
because I felt different, I made myself different. Because what we hold inside is projected outward. So our outer world, our outer reality is just a reflection of what we hold inside.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, yeah, when I read that in the book, I thought, okay, there's a bit of a defense mechanism, but at the end of the day, it also worked in your favor with your husband,
Mm-hmm.
right? You have these differences, but yet there's probably, you have to have a set of values that you both adhere to make it work. Not that
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to get into your relationship right now, but right away I thought, you know, because I related to the defense mechanism thing. I thought, oh, you know, this is what we do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, you know, I believe
Yes.
that our bodies tell the truth. Our mind doesn't always tell the truth. So I'm going to give you a really simple
Yeah.
example,
Oh,
and then
sure.
we
That'd
could
be great.
definitely go into it further. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, before we got on this interview, I could have felt a dryness in my throat. I could have felt a tightness in my chest, a fluttering in my stomach.
Hmm.
And I could have said or labeled that nervousness.
Sure.
But Lauren, those are the same exact sensations I have when I'm excited. It's me who decides what label I put on it, nervousness or excitement. So I believe that the mind doesn't always create stories that are true. And I believe the body actually tells the truth.
I see.
So I'll take that a little bit further. So
Yeah.
when something happens in life, somebody says something, and I'll give you a specific example.
Hmm.
When people said hurtful things to me growing up,
Hmm.
it felt like an elephant sitting on my chest. It felt like I couldn't breathe, right? So whenever I feel a contraction today in my body,
Hmm.
I say thank you. And it might sound a little strange, but I say thank you because it's my body telling me that there is a story, a label, or a judgment that I'm holding on to, or there's an opportunity to heal. So somebody recently said this, and I love it. He said, issues in your tissues. So things that we experience in this lifetime, trauma, stories, labels, get attached in our bodies. And we could talk definitely about that a little further. But we also inherit things from our parents, our
Hmm.
ancestors, as we talked about. We
Yeah.
also experience things when we were in our mother's womb because she
Yes.
experienced it as well. So whenever there's a contraction or something happens, I notice where I feel it in my body and I say thank you. And I breathe into it and I soften it and I let it go.
Hmm. You, there was something that you wrote in the book that I found interesting in terms of being with Diana, who is the healer that's um, named Diana in the book. You write, that you chose her, that everything felt right, but it also felt wrong. And I'm wondering if you can touch on that.
So it was really an interesting situation because, I worked with her and I was healed after my hysterectomy.
Yes.
And it was interesting because I actually took no painkillers after my hysterectomy. So I was healed, but I continued to work with her for several months. And I felt really drawn to continue to work with her. And I wasn't really sure. My logical mind was saying, hey, I'm this crazy finance director with this crazy schedule with kids. I don't really have time to see this healer. I'm already healed. So that was the dichotomy. I felt like I needed to see her, but I also felt like I don't need to see her. So I was being pulled in two different directions at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Well, to your point in the book that you repeat often, and what you've said in this interview today, is the fact that, we're loved and that we're never alone. And so in that place of you coming to this realization that you were just guided, right? You were guided to continue to see her.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if that guidance was a prompt, or again, the connection to the creator to say, no, you got to go along, because you have to, you've got to cross paths with her so that you're about to learn something that will definitely just change your life.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And, I just wanted to comment because you said we're never alone. And
Yes.
there was a part in the story. So after my hysterectomy, I mentioned I didn't take painkillers. So
Yes.
I literally lay in bed trying not to move because every single sneeze, every single movement felt literally like an electric shock through my abdomen.
Okay.
And as I was laying there, and again, many of these things feel like near-death experiences, this, for lack of a better word, this gentle Irish guide, Irish nurse would just come into my awareness. And again, I believe it was because my heart was wide open. And the message that she gave me was that we are never alone, never abandoned, always loved. If we knew who stood beside us in every moment, we would never be afraid. And the reason why I think that's so important is, Lauren, if you knew beyond a doubt that you were never alone,
Mhm.
never abandoned, always loved, would you live your life differently?
Oh, great question.
So I think it's just an
Wow.
invitation. It's an invitation for everyone,
Mm-hmm.
because we are never alone, as you said, we are never abandoned. And I do believe the universe gives us signs all the time. Sometimes we just are too busy to either hear it, notice it, or we dismiss it as a coincidence.
Well, what about those? How are those supposed to grasp that sort of innate understanding if they're born into, abuse and all the rest of it, addiction and that, or, in a developing country, or they're born in a refugee camp? Like, how is that? How does that philosophy apply to those circumstances? Because I get what you're saying, it resonates for me, but I'm wondering, who's taking care of them?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And miracles certainly come out of those circumstances. We hear them, but oftentimes it's hard. We're not in positions of power.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, we've got various individuals ruling the planet. So and that's actually the question that I have today,
Mm-hmm. And I
because
think,
yeah, it's everything that's come so much to light.
mm-hmm.
It's not just North America, across the globe.
Right. So I'm going to answer in two ways. I
Okay.
believe that there are different messages for different people in my book. So if you have a faith or an understanding of a creator,
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a message for you as well. But if you don't believe in a creator or a higher level of understanding, that's okay as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like I mentioned before, painful and unwanted events are going to happen, right?
Yes. Yes.
So for me, we could either, so Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor
Mm-hmm.
wrote a book, and you're shaking your head, so you
Yeah.
probably know who she is. She wrote a book called My Stroke of Insight.
Mm-hmm.
And she was a Harvard neuroscientist who was actually able to heal herself from traumatic brain injury. And what I got out of the book was this 90-second rule. So again, this has nothing to do with faith or religion. And what
Yes.
it says is that when a good event or a bad event happens, It literally only takes 90 seconds for us to actually process that event through our physiology and then let it go. After those 90 seconds, it's up to us. Meaning that after those 90 seconds, do we just let it go? Or do we hang on to it, make it part of ourselves? Do we create a story about it and then have a hard time letting go of it? So, what I invite people to do is when something happens, again, take it to the body, notice where you feel it in your body, right? Acknowledge it, maybe put your hand on that area, breathe gently into it, acknowledge it, love into it, because I believe love heals everything. And then just let it go. Don't create the story. Because I believe the most dangerous part of an event is not necessarily the event. It's the story that you create around the event that you keep repeating over and over again. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, there's an old Taoist fable. Can I share it with you?
Sure.
And you might have heard of this. It's about his farmer and his horse.
Okay.
And the horse was the farmer's prized possession. And one day the horse ran away. And the neighbors came over to console the farmer. And the farmer said, maybe.
Mm.
And then the next day, the horse returned with 12 wild horses for the
Uh-huh.
farmer to train. And then the neighbors came back over again. And they said, how fortunate. And the farmer said, maybe. And then the next day, the farmer's son is training one of the wild horses, falls and breaks his leg. And then the neighbors come back over and say, how unfortunate. And the farmer says, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next day, an army comes through town to enlist all eligible men. And the farmer's son was spared because of his broken leg. And then the neighbors come back over and say, how fortunate. And the farmer says, maybe. And the farmer can go back and forth with this kind of story, back and forth.
Yeah.
But the farmer is able to weather the situations in his life much more easily because he doesn't label them as either good or bad. And when we take that 1,000-foot view of all of the events in our lives, it weaves together to tell a much richer story. So, Lauren, I know many people that I've spoken to have had traumatic events or situations happen in their lives. And oftentimes, if you ask them, would you go through the same thing again?
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes they would say yes, because it helped make them stronger.
Yeah, that's the irony, isn't it?
Yeah.
um, I'm curious about Diana and actually let me rephrase this, because in some way you've it's always time to let go of something, and all of us have difficulty, or not all of us, many of us have difficulty in letting go. And I'm curious about how you feel about at the time, like letting go, and how you felt, and how you feel about that today.
And you know, that was a learning experience. I did have issues letting go.
Yeah.
But I believe that life is a cycle. So it starts with the void. It starts with the void. And sometimes many people, and I learned this from my mentor, Dr. Sue Morter, there's the void. And sometimes many of us feel uncomfortable in the void. It feels like we're waiting for something. It feels like we're in this sense of nothingness.
Mm-hmm.
But Lauren, in the void, everything exists.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels like that because
Yeah.
everything is there. There's no absence of anything. But then in that void, it's waiting for our spark of inspiration or creation. So the next phase then becomes create. So in that void, spark of inspiration, then we create something. We create something in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
It could be anything. It could be having a child, getting a new job. We create. Then
Mm-hmm.
after create is sustain. So we reap the benefits of what we created. And then after sustain is destroy. And for most people, to your very point, most people have a difficulty in that destroy phase. And we have to learn to let go so we can then go back into the void and then keep creating and progressing and awakening. So for many people, it's difficult, that destroy phase. But all that means is that in the sustain phase, we have to really appreciate and understand what was the lesson. So that was what it was for me. I appreciated, I understood the lesson and the experience of meeting Diana in this lifetime and how it helped me heal, not just me, but my family for
Oh,
generations.
yes.
And then once we walk through that door, we have to realize that we can't go back. We're always growing and we're always expanding. So what I did in that situation was I just loved into it. I loved the experience that I had. I gave gratitude for the experience that I had and for the relationships that we had. And then I let it go.
Mm. When I was reading that part in the book, I felt, I wondered, I was curious about, yeah, Diana, and I think you mentioned in the book and how you felt. You acknowledged, gee, I wonder how she's doing after the fact and that. So I was like, yeah, how is she doing? How does Good Friday feel today? Because I know that a few years ago on Good Friday, that's when you had this spiritual experience when you were at this church.
Mm-hmm. And the spiritual experience just literally descended upon me. Like I said, my life was crazy. It was busy. And I
Yeah,
was sitting in church on Good Friday.
yeah.
And I was literally just waiting for mass to start. The choir was singing, the band was playing, my kids were texting next to each other. And I was just sitting there, minding my own business. And out of nowhere, literally out of nowhere, this overwhelming sense of love descended upon me. And it was every sense of love you could possibly imagine, multiplied 1,000,000 times, literally coursing through my body. And it just overflowed in tears because I couldn't hold it in. And like I said, many of these experiences sound like near-death experiences that people describe. But in that moment, I realized how incredibly loved I was, but not just me. I realized how incredibly loved we all are.
Hmm.
And that's actually what started this journey for me.
Right, 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 right. How now? What today? Like, what's of value today? You've gone through quite the experience. Um, how do you feel? Like, what's of value? What's important for you today?
Love. And I know it sounds, love, airy fairy. A lot of people say that. But, I truly believe that love heals everything in many respects. So I don't know. Are you a Harry Potter fan?
Do you know what? To be perfectly frank, I've only watched bits and pieces of it. I haven't watched like the full thing in its entirety, but I'll say yes.
That's okay. That's
Yeah.
okay. But for people who've seen Harry Potter,
Mm-hmm.
right? Harry was spared. He wasn't killed by Lord Voldemort's curse
Mm-hmm.
because of his mother's love. And I believe love is so powerful. And I believe we are love, but I believe love is so powerful. I believe love can heal. So, for example, when you generate that sense of love, you can literally send it to different parts of your body. You can love into different sensations of pain that you might have in your body. And it's been shown where people have actually been able to heal themselves
Mm-hmm.
by loving into the pain, right? Instead of beating yourself up for that toothache that you have, why don't you love into the fact that you have teeth that you can chew food, digest, etc., right? But love into it. But what I discovered, it's not just love is not just for healing. With the law of attraction, you're supposed to think about, what you want, what are your intentions, but you're also supposed to feel into it. So what does it feel like when you actually have what you're intending? But I say that you also need to love into it. Love into those intentions, and you will actually see those intentions manifest in your life more quickly. And I do believe that there's only two emotions. Everything else kind of collapses into those two emotions, fear and love.
Mm-hmm.
Fear is basically just a contracted negative energy, wishing that we can change the past or afraid of the future. So when we let go of that fear, all that's left is love.
I want to just acknowledge your family and your half sister and your mother.
Hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So, in closing, what can perfect And we might want to give a shout out to Ed Sheeran, by the way.
I want to send him a copy, but I don't know where he lives.
Oh, I know. Do you know what? I don't think he's on social media, and I would too. It's like, how does Ed know about? I'm serious. I was thinking, how will Ed know about this book?
Yes, his song inspired the name of the book as well.
Yeah, yeah. Um, in closing, what would you say the takeaway for this book is, that for people to be inspired to grab this and invite this book into their lives for reading?
You know, I believe that once our perspective changes, everything changes, life changes, because we can no longer look at life the same way. And I invite people, when they read the book, it helps them change their perspective. So, as I mentioned before, it's about the stories, right? And you asked about all this, all of this turmoil going on in the world. So, I believe when we let go of the stories, the labels, and judgments, we see everything through the eyes of love, where there is no separation. And I invite people, when we come from that place, there really is no separation.
Thank you.
Mm.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I really, really appreciate it. I feel so grateful.
It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you, Lauren.
Thank you. It was so unexpected, and I hope everybody can take something away from this conversation today, that you've got some great tips. And there's some lovely prayers and meditations in this book that I think that the audience would also appreciate, that I loved doing.
Mm.
So thank you. And once again, thanks again for your journey. And I'm thrilled that you were able to experience this miracle.
Oh, thank you. And again, you're such a bright light. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you. Okay, everybody, take good care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for joining.